Good morning students. Today I shall discuss a new topic which is joining tables in MySQL. The joining of tables in MySQL can be done with the help of a foreign key. A foreign key is an attribute or a set of attributes that is the primary key of another table. Now we may also use the term column to represent attributes. Basically, a foreign key is used to link two different tables. Now considering these two tables, that is a table student and the table device, the primary key column for the table student is SID. This is because if you see this column called SID, all its entries are distinct or unique. There are no duplicate entries for this column called SID. That's why this column SID acts as the primary key column of the table student. Similarly, for the table device, the column DID acts as the primary key. This is because all the entries of this DID column are distinct or unique. There are no duplicate entries for this DID column. And once we have got the primary key columns DID and SID for both these tables, student and device, we shall use another key to link both these tables, and that key will be the foreign key. Now let's try to find out which is the foreign key of the table device that will connect the table device with the table student. Now if you see the table device, in addition to the primary key column DID which exists in this table device, there is one more column called SID. But this SID column also exists in the table student as a primary key column. So this column SID which exists in the table device not as a primary key column is known as the foreign key column. And this foreign key column SID is used to relate both these tables student and device, or we can say this SID column shall be used to link both these tables, that is student and device, and that's why this SID column is known as the foreign key column of the table device. Now consider these three tables, that is student, device and purchase, as shown in this slide. The table student has a primary key column called SID and all its entries are distinct. Similarly, the table device also has a primary key column which is DID and all its entries are distinct. But the table purchase does not have any primary key column, as the first two columns SID and DID has duplicate entries. You can see clearly here the entry S10 for the column SID is getting repeated thrice, and again here the entry D30 for the column DID is getting repeated thrice. So this table purchase does not have any primary key column. Now based on these three tables, that is student, device and purchase, I shall show you some SQL queries from the next slide. Now read the question in this slide. The question says, write a query in MySQL to display the names of students, device name, quantity of devices and purchase date from the table student, device and purchase respectively. Now for this question, the query will be select s.sname comma d.dname, comma p.qty, comma p.qtydt from student S, comma device D, comma purchase P. Now here S is the alias name for the table student, D is the alias name for the table device, and P is the alias name for the table purchase. So in this figure, the alias name of the table student is S, the alias name for the table device is D, and the alias name for the table purchase is P. Now from this query, using the alias name S of the table student, I am retrieving the column S name. That is, using the alias name S of the table student, I am retrieving this column, which is S name. Again, using the alias name D of the table device, I am retrieving the column D name. That is, from the table device, I am retrieving the column D name using the alias name D of the table device. And after that, using the alias name P of the table purchase, I am retrieving the columns QTY and QTYDT from the table purchase. That means from this table, that is purchase, I am retrieving the column names QTY and QTYDT with the help of the alias name P of the table purchase. That's why using this query, when we select S name, D name, QTY and QTYDT from the tables student, device and purchase respectively with their aliases, I can see the columns, that is S name, D name, QTY and QTYDT shown exactly like this as in the output table. Now, how did we get all these entries for in the output table? Okay, how did we get all these entries in the output table? These entries that we have got in the output table is based on the joining condition, which is specified in the where clause. Now let me highlight the joining condition. So this is the one. The first part of the joining condition says s.sid is equal to p.sid. That means student.sid should be equal to purchase.sid. Now when student.sid shall be equal to purchase.sid, then for one S10 entry value for the SID column in the student table, there are 3 S10 entry values for the same SID column in the purchase table as shown here. The corresponding student name for the SID value as S10 is Arpita. And that's why you can see 3 entries of Arpita in the output table. Let me highlight it. This is the first Arpita, this is the second one, and this is the third one. Now let's check the second part of the joining condition, which says d.did is equal to p.did, or the DID column of the device table should be equal to the DID column of the purchase table. Now for the SID value as S10, the corresponding DID value with D10 in the purchase table, when it is equal to the corresponding DID value as D10 in the device table, the associated device name is RAM. That's why in the output table, for the first entry of ARPITA, the associated device name is RAM. And once we have found that the device name is RAM for the DID value as D10, then for the same DID value as D10, we can also find the QTY and the QTY value. That is, for the device ID as D10, the QTY value is 5 and the QTY DT value is 2013-95. That's why in this output table, for the first ARPITA entry, whose device name is RAM, has the QTY value 5 and QTY DT value as 2013-95. So is that clear? The first ARPITA entry, okay, the first student ARPITA who has purchased the device called RAM and who has purchased 5 quantities of that purchased device RAM on this particular date 2013-95, her record is displayed here in the output table. Let me highlight it. So this is the one. Now the same student ARPITA whose SID is S10 and who has initially purchased the device having DID as D10, which is actually the device RAM, has also purchased another device with the DID value as D30 or the device ID as D30, and the device ID with the value D30 is PENDRIVE. That means the same student ARPITA who has initially purchased the device RAM has also purchased another device called PENDRIVE. So at first she has purchased the device PENDRIVE with the device ID as D30 on this date, that is 2031-26, and on this date she has purchased 2 quantities of PENDRIVE, and again on another date, that is 2013-12-25, she has purchased 3 quantities of the same device, that is PENDRIVE, having the DID value as D30. That's why we have 2 more entries of ARPITA in the output table. The second entry of ARPITA shows that she has purchased the device PENDRIVE on the date 2013-1-26, and she has purchased 2 quantities of that device called PENDRIVE. And again the same student ARPITA has purchased the device PENDRIVE, this time 3 quantities of that on another date, that is 2013-12-25. Now as a result, in the same way, you try the joining condition, that is s.sid equal to p.sid and d.did equal to p.did for the rest of the students, that is for the students other than ARPITA, which are Tushar, Astik, Hansika and Anumita. And on doing that, you will see the rest of the students are also getting displayed. based on this joining condition. So in the output table we can see that other than the student named Arpita, for the student Astik, she has purchased the device DVD. For the student Anumita, she has also purchased the device DVD. Again, for the student Tushar, she has purchased the different device, that is pen drive. And for the student Hansika, she has also purchased the device called pen drive. And the entries in these tables have been found using the joining condition in the where clause of this query. Now read the question in this slide. The question says, write a query in MySQL to display the names of students who have purchased a pen drive. And the answer to this question is the query, that is select s.sname from student s, device d, purchase p. So same is the case here. The s is the alias name for the table student, D is the alias name for the table device, and P is the alias name for the table purchase. And using the alias name S of the table student, I am retrieving the column called sname of the table student. Using the join condition specified in the where clause, that is s.sid equal to p.sid, and again d.did is equal to p.did. Now let's check the first part of the joining condition, which is s.sid is equal to p.sid. Again, for s.sid, that is the SID value for the student table, if the value is S10, then for the same SID column in the purchase table, there are 3 entries of S10, and the student corresponding to this SID value S10 is Arpita. Now let's check the second joining condition, that is d.did is equal to p.did. That means the did value from the device table, if it's equal to the did value from the purchase table, then for the SID value as S10, which is occurring 3 times in the purchase table, the corresponding did values are D10 and D30 in the purchase table. And for the did value as D10 in the purchase table, the corresponding did value in the device table has the associated device name, which is RAM. And for the did value as D30 in the purchase table, the associated device name for the same did value, which is D30 in the device table, is PENDRIVE. So for the did value as D10, the device name is RAM, and for the did value as D30, the device name is PENDRIVE. Now since the SID value S10 is occurring thrice, so for the first SID value, which is S10, having the did value as D10, the device name will be RAM. And for the second and the third SID value as S10, whose did value is D30, the corresponding device name will be PENDRIVE. And you can easily find it out here from the device table. Now, after specifying the joining condition in the where clause, see the next condition. The next condition is specified after the AND clause. It says that the device name from the device table should be PENDRIVE. Okay, that means the device name should be only PENDRIVE. Now if that is so, we have to discard the first device, that is RAM, associated with the DID value D10, because the device name as specified in the query should only be PENDRIVE. As a result, the first SID value having the entry S10 and which is associated with the device ID as D10, which is RAM, should be discarded. Now we are left with only these two values of SID, that is S10 associated with the device ID as D30. And since the device associated with the device ID D30 is PENDRIVE, so the same student Arpita is purchasing only the device PENDRIVE, and she is purchasing the device PENDRIVE bearing the device ID as D30 on the date 26/1/2013 and again on the date 25/12/2013. That's why we have to record two entries of the student name Arpita, who is purchasing the device having the device ID D30, which is nothing but a device called PENDRIVE. And at first we have to record on this particular date, that is 2013-1/26, and then again we have to record on this particular date, which is 2013-12/25. And as a result, the name Arpita has been recorded twice because she has purchased the device PENDRIVE on two different dates. And that's why in the output table you can see the student name Arpita getting displayed twice, as you are asked to select only the student name column from the student table, and that's clearly shown here that using the alias S of the student table, it is retrieving the entries of the column called SName, and that is what has been shown here, that for the column SName there are two entries of Arpita, and the rest of the entries Tushar and Hansika are also retrieved in the output table, and they are retrieved just by following the same joining condition, that is where s.sid is equal to p.sid and d.did is equal to p.did. And after the joining condition, it also follows this condition, that is d.dname should be equal to PENDRIVE. And upon executing this MySQL query, you can see the output table exactly like this, with only the SName column and with its entries Tushar Hansika appearing once and Arpita appearing twice. And with this I end my presentation here, and that's all for today.